Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Williamsburg City Council meeting of August 11th. Mr. Trivett, are you calling the roll today?
Looks that way. Let's see. We'll see if we can. I don't even have a paper, so we'll see if we can remember everybody's name. Mr. Rogers.
Here.
Ms. Ramsey.
Here.
Mr. Mayor. Mr. Dent.
Here.
And Mr. Maslin.
Here.
Thank you. Takes us to item 3 on the agenda, which is the minutes. You all have in your packet the minutes from June 9th, July 10th, and July 14th. Corrections or a motion?
So I move that we approve the minutes of June 9th, July 11th, and July 14th.
Second.
Good. Mr. Trivett, would you call the roll, please?
I will. Mr. Rogers.
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey.
Aye.
Mr. Pons.
Aye.
Mr. Dent.
Aye.
Mr. Maslin.
Aye.
Okay. Takes us to our financial reports. First is the monthly financial statement. Ms. Dameron, welcome.
Good afternoon. Just a few comments for July, and then we're going to step back into June in regards to sales tax for a minute. So in your packet on your financial report, on page 1, we do notice that we have about an 84% increase in the delinquent real property taxes compared to last year at this time. We also see that our recordation revenue has increased about 126% compared to the previous July. And also our permits and license has an increase compared to last year, this time about 297%. That's predominantly from building permits and then related to development at Quarter Path. I'll also note that you'll note on page 2 of your financial report, our revenues are increased about 16.5% compared to the previous July. And we have a transfer from our reserves of about increase of about 3.5% compared to last July. Now, the only thing unusual about that is we do have an extra month, 2 months, of transfers to the schools, just a timing of the payments. And when we adjust for that, we're actually, our expenditures, which are shown on page 4 of your report, at $4 million, about a 5.6% increase over the previous July. We're actually a little bit under that, about 15.5% less when I make that adjustment. And so just to give you an idea, then that transfer, because of that adjustment, would have been, without the additional school expense in, about 22% less than it was, about 2.5 million instead of 3.3. Okay. Moving forward to our capital projects, not a lot to report there, except we do see an increase in our interest income. We won't see the sales tax for this year come on until next month because of the 2-month delay. Same situation with our tourism fund. Our utility fund, I did note that our revenues for water utility decreased about 12%. Looking at the consumption, we see that residential decreased about 8.7%. However, our commercial is about level, and that all nets out to about a 1.3% decrease in consumption. So I'm still exploring what makes up for that other piece. Is it delinquent taxes or timing difference? And as soon as I have that information, I'll pass that on forward. Additionally, the sewer revenue has increased. I do see that we have an increase in consumption overall of about, we have about a 3% decrease in consumption, but we know that there was a rate increase there that we're seeing. Of course, that gets passed through in expenditures. Our total revenues in the utility system, though, primarily because of some of the water tower usage and also tap fees, has increased about 5.2% compared to last year this time. Our expenditures or a bit less, about 16% less than they were last July. All that nets out to about a 34% increase in our operating revenues. We'll continue to monitor that moving forward. All in all, everything's within the budget in terms of expenditures. When we look at page 9 in your packet, where we have our meals and our room tax as well as sales tax, for the month of June compared to June of 2019, we have about 4.5% increase in the rooms tax. We also, year-to-date, it's also a 4.5% increase compared to FY19. And as you know, I like to look at the year before we had COVID, the last year before COVID. In our meals tax, comparing June of 22 to June of 19, we have about an 8.5% increase in the meals tax. And on an annual basis, comparing FY22 to FY19, it's a 7.7% increase. However, when we get to our sales tax, looking at the month of the revenue that we received for May activity, we have about a 30% decrease compared to FY19, and that is because we had another redistribution of sales tax to the tune of $147,000, and we will look next month to have another decrease of about $138,000. Also, when you look at the historic sales tax, you'll see that comparing May activity of 22 to May of 19, it's a 51.6% decrease. I do not, as of yet, have numbers regarding how much of that's redistribution. We know some of that hit. Our Commissioner of Revenue, Laura Overy, has worked with the state trying to get these numbers, and we think it might be a couple of months before we have that information on the historic sales tax.
So even looking at the sales tax collections for July, which will have the $130,000 redistribution,
Right.
looks to me that we'll still finish the year ahead
Right.
over last year.
Right. Even right now, when I take the 147 and add it back to what we received, we were still about 8.3% less than what we had for activity in May of 2019. But still overall ahead. And then likewise on page 10, looking at the $2 lodging tax, we're about 14% less than we were in 2019 for the month, and overall annually about 15% decrease compared to FY 2019. And with that, concludes my report for the month. Be glad to entertain any questions.
I don't have any questions, Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Dameron. On those redistribution, that's not done on a regular schedule, they just...
Well, here's what happens, and Commissioner of Revenue has worked hard to go ahead and try to spot those and send the information for a transfer, but apparently there are several departments involved at the state level, and so sometimes it takes a while before they actually make the transfer. But we're trying. She's working hard to try to catch that and correct it. I believe she's even reached out to some of the businesses that are reporting incorrectly, but has not been successful in getting that corrected.
Okay, thank you.
No questions, thank you.
I have no questions either. Thank you.
None for me. Thank you, Director Dameron.
Okay, takes us now to monthly departmental operating reports. Drew, do you want to make any comments or an introduction?
We're going to invite Robbie Hutton up. She's going to talk to us about Parks and Rec's progress toward the GIO to make the parks more ADA accessible, I believe.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of City Council. Today I'll be giving you a brief update on Parks and Recreation accessibility, which is an initiative under the goal of One Williamsburg. And the effort of that initiative is to continue to implement changes at public parks and facilities to improve access and use in compliance with the ADA. So although it's specific to Parks and Recreation, it should really be viewed as an extension of the city's commitment to provide an all-inclusive community. So in order to accomplish this goal, Parks and Recreation staff conducted a compliance audit of each of our facilities and parks. And with that, we created a detailed report. This is just a modified sample of Kiwanis Park. And so each report notes the infraction. It also includes a recommendation, a cost analysis, and a schedule for completion. We also created a three-tiered priority guideline. So anything that's listed as number 1 is a top priority, and that includes items that revolve around entrance into a park or a facility, parking or restrooms. The second tier includes elements that involve access to public amenities within the park, like picnic tables, seating, play structures, water fountains. And the third tier includes things like tennis courts, sport courts, athletic fields, concessions. And so this really is a snapshot of what we've accomplished since implementation, since 2018. And as you can see, we have a lot of projects that are planned that we're really excited about. So that's just a real brief overview, and I'm happy to entertain any questions that you may have.
Well, thank you, Ms. Hutton. Appreciate the report. As you mentioned, council made it one of their goals and initiatives and outcomes, or GIOs, priorities, to make sure that our parks are accessible, for those that are challenged with accessibility. So I applaud your efforts to manage all of this and report back to us that we are making progress. So this was just a snapshot of Kiwanis Park, but clearly you're doing that same assessment.
Right, so that assessment's done at all of our facilities and our parks, and this implementation slide right here shows other projects other than Kiwanis.
Vice Mayor?
Thanks, Robbie, for the update, and really appreciate all the work that you've done to help council fulfill one of our GIOs, and most of all because you've had some staffing challenges along the way that makes the workload for everyone else more difficult. So happy to see the things you've accomplished and excited to see the rest of the projects move forward.
Thank you. And in 2021, we put our projects on hold, and it kind of bled over to 2022 because of our staffing shortage. So we did carry those projects forward, and you'll see that's why there's quite a few for 2023.
So, yeah, thanks for the presentation. So we know what accessibility is both a federal civil rights issue as well as a building code issue. What type of input have we had from citizens, and can you focus a little more on Waller Mill? Because we know that's been a lot of interest in Waller Mill.
Sure. So the way it is with the ADA is for Parks and Recreation, we're not required to bring all of our non-compliant items into compliance because we fall under Title II. And so Title II covers us where compliance isn't possible due to terrain or if compliance would change the functionality of the park. So there's a lot of areas within Waller Mill Park that we won't be able to make compliant. However, all the areas that we are able to make compliant, we certainly intend to.
But can you give examples of, I think, the docks and
Yep.
the boats?
So for Waller Mill, all of our fishing docks are accessible. We just recently completed that project for our smaller fishing pier. Our access to the canoe and kayak launch is now accessible, and our bathrooms are accessible. Our shelters are accessible. So really the next big projects for Waller Mill are the playgrounds.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robbie. I just have a couple questions
Sure.
also. So in talking about accessibility at Waller Mill, when you talk about the fishing pier, can you go into detail a little bit about what you did, whether it was changed to the path construction materials or the width, and what exactly
Yes.
accessibility means?
Sure, so it's a combination of that. So we improve the pathway to the fishing pier, making the surface accessible, so it's a compacted stone. And then we widened the entry, and we also they're called tow holes for someone who would want to fish from a wheelchair. So accessibility really is the materials that are used on the pathways, and the width to be able to make a wheelchair make a turn.
And so in that term, accessibility is primarily for sort of personal transportation with the wheelchair. Are there any things done for those who might be sight challenged or hearing challenged or things like that?
So we don't have anything like that at Waller Mill, but we do have in our full plan to make some improvements for those impairments at Readout with some of our signage to help with that.
Good. And one last question, when you talk about 2018, so does that show that 2018, the improved dog park entrance, that's completed, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then, obviously, 22, the fishing pier you said was completed, and then now working on 2023?
Yes, ma'am. Right, and so the projects that were completed prior to 18 are not on this, because we didn't really officially do the assessment until after, like, Waller Mill was improved with the docks.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for coming and presenting, Director Hutton. I don't have any particular questions, only to say I appreciate your work, and I remember us discussing this during our GIO session of 2020. So the now monthly presentation from department heads is very useful, and I understand the fact that some CIP projects would have to be pushed in 2021, so it's exciting to see the breadth of work that you all are planning for next year. So thank you again.
Thank you for your time, and our transition plan will continue to be a working document, and we'll continue to make the improvements.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robbie. Anything else with departmental operating reports?
No.
Any questions for staff? All right, city manager's report.
So, city manager's report, I'm actually going to call on Mark Barham to talk to us and give us an update on the Glow Fiber by Chantel project.
Thank you, Drew. So we were actually notified this morning, the project manager as well as 2 field technicians have permanently relocated to the area. Those are the folks that are going to manage the project. Crews have begun the marking process so that they understand where all the utilities are. And then they're going to mobilize actually 2 crews to begin this coming Monday. They'll begin putting fiber in the ground this coming Monday as they develop their backbone. And then once that's kind of in place, they'll start doing laterals off of that to the home. So, as we said, when they came here originally and they were awarded the franchise agreement, it's about a 3-year process from the time of the franchise was awarded. So we're now looking at about another 2 years for them to have the build-out fully completed and offering the service to citizens.
And just to remind everybody, so this is another GIO of the city council was to look at broadband initiatives so that we could have better service in the area, and we were able to work with Chantel to bring that service to us. So this will be fiber to the user, which is a totally different type of service than Cox offers now. And so as Mark says, in roughly 2 years, there'll be an option other than Cox. And for some people, it'll probably be sooner than that, because I'm sure they won't wait on the whole system to be done to start turning on connections as they reach neighborhoods. So pretty exciting step forward, and glad to have them as part of the community.
Well, thank you for the report. Just a follow-up question, and Travis kind of addressed it. Obviously, as they put in the backbone and have the ability to finger off into people's homes and businesses, they'll be turning on that switch.
Correct.
And so the availability of the service will be sooner rather than waiting 2 years for.
Yeah, 2 years is when it's completely built out in the entire
And when
city.
you say completely, that means available to all the homes in Williamsburg? Are they targeting certain neighborhoods?
No, it'll be generally available to all homes in the city. I believe there's a number in the franchise agreement that they have to reach an upper 90s percentage. I don't know what that number is off the top of my head, but they have to reach the overwhelming majority of the citizens.
Right.
Of
The
homes in
goal was to
city.
cover the city with a second provider.
Yes.
And they're starting in certain areas as they come through town, so to speak.
Correct.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor.
Yeah, so that was my question, they've identified the areas where, and I get, the biggest question is if the backbone work is visible to the public, people are gonna start getting excited about.
So according to the update that was given to me, that they sent this morning, the backbone that they're gonna start building out on Monday is in Waltz Farm Drive intersecting Richmond Road, as well as Long Hill Road intersecting Ironbound Road. So those are the first two parts of the backbone that they're putting in place.
Good, that's good to know, thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I asked that you talk about this at this meeting because I'm getting questions from neighbors. Do you think there'll be a point where they'll be able to have a schedule that says, hey, these neighborhoods may be ready certain days so we can actually point to that?
I don't know if they'll get that specific. We could certainly ask them to provide, I'm sure they have a working plan in terms of how they're going, and we can certainly ask them to provide that with estimated timelines on it. But in terms of, on this date, we're going to offer the service, I don't know that they're at that point yet.
And then maybe generally just telling us how far in advance of that they'll be marketing to neighborhoods.
Sure. We do know that they're going to go no more than 1,000 feet. They're going to be having the locators working out ahead of them no more than 1,000 feet per day. So that's, if you kind of think about that, that we would expect them to get at least in that range per day, that much in terms of putting that much fiber in the ground.
Yeah, and we've started to see their signs up. Has that been coordinated with the city in terms of all the yard signs that they're putting up?
That I don't know.
Yes, it has.
Because that's getting the neighbors excited too. It's a good thing. Marketing with yard signs, so if we can just follow that up with maybe a little more formal information, that would be great.
Sure.
Thanks.
Thank you. I have no questions.
Thanks, Mark, for the update. I do have a couple of questions. I'll similarly say on the excitement note, I think I saw a small billboard on the back of a bus the other day talking about Chantel. So certainly the word will start getting out. I know when they came here to present in front of us, there was talks of some sort of station off of North Henry Street. Do you know if there will be any actual construction done from them or any disturbance that would be in that area as they start to?
I don't believe, and I'm going to turn around and look at Aaron Small. I don't believe it's North Henry Street. I believe it's actually, is it?
It is.
It is North Henry Street.
There's a small station located right,
Yep.
it's just a small box, it's actually not much bigger
Aaron?
than our.
Yeah. Come up.
Mr. Small, maybe come to the microphone, so.
Sorry to make you stand up, Aaron.
It's okay, Caleb. Yes, there will be a small, station box, located right at the entrance to Highland Park on the right side, adjacent to the other utility boxes that are in that location. So it's not even really that close to a house, and it's a little bigger than this dais here.
Okay, and what's the process for putting that into the ground and getting it settled?
The three areas that they're focusing on, the three neighborhoods that they're really focusing on, they're called LCBs or LCPs, and those are Highland Park and the area up near Long Hill Woods, Skipwith Farms, Piney Creek Estates, and Savannah Green. And those are projected by the end of the year.
Okay.
In addition to the two backbone sections. Part of the backbone does come down Bypass Road and then down North Henry Street to tie into the other fiber optic systems in front of the library.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Best city manager report I've had in a long time.
Me too.
Mr. Barham, thank you for the report. Certainly appreciate Mr. Maslin bringing that topic up for conversation. I think the residents are excited about it, as am I. Shelton, anything from City Attorney?
Nothing at this time.
Okay, excellent. Takes us now to unfinished business. We have item A, consideration and adoption of resolution number 22-18, authorizing a revised micro-mobility RFP seeking vendors for an e-bike pilot program. Mr. Trivett.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So this is an item, we talked about it extensively, well, maybe not extensively, but we talked about it on Monday in our long meeting and went over where we have come from 2019 to today. I did ask for you to consider to make a change to the resolution that we would put for you today, and that change has been made. So now what it says is that it can be up to 3 vendors and no more than 30 bikes total. So I think we're accomplishing the mission there. The only thing that this action really does is authorize me to issue the RFP by adopting the resolution as guidelines. And so in a month or so, we'll issue the RFP, we'll get responses back, and then the council will actually make the decision whether or not to proceed with this. So we want to be clear, this is not an action item that puts 30 bikes on the street next week or even next month. There's another decision to be made by the council, and that's whether or not to accept any of the proposals that we get, or reject them all, or mix them up. We'll have ultimate flexibility when we get to that stage.
Well, so I personally, I think this is a good step forward in a good direction, to providing this, modern micro-mobility, which was something that we didn't think about 10 years ago, certainly not here in our community, but, I think as I've explored the process of the thought process of this and thinking about electric scooters and electric bikes, I'm much more pleased with the concept of electric bikes versus scooters and other things, just for safety. And I think, limiting the number to 30 helps it from, being too obtrusive in our critical historic area where I think, at least for me, and I'm sure for everyone, we want to make sure that we preserve the ambiance of the historic area as much as possible. And I think by allowing no more than 30 helps keep that risk down. And I think that's an important part of this for me. And it supports local businesses. It gives new businesses the opportunity to try a new way of bringing in customers. So thank you for the recommendation.
Yeah, I agree. I think the revisions to the RFP are positive, and we get the opportunity to look at vendors and, as the mayor mentioned, specifically for bikes right now. And I know probably everyone's visited communities with scooters, and I personally haven't observed one where it's managed very well. So that's why I think that starting out with bikes is the way to go for Williamsburg.
I agree, thanks.
I would agree also, and in fact, I was at a meeting yesterday, and one of the board members commented on using e-bikes. I think it was in Virginia Beach, and he talked about how convenient it was and how accessible. And in fact, it was he used an Uber app on his phone to rent the bike, and so he said that made it even easier. Didn't have to download yet another app to rent the bike. So he was pleased to see that we were considering this moving forward.
And I agree too with all that's been said. I think I'd just add on that this RFP will allow us to collect data and information over the next 3 years. Is 30 bikes the right level? Is there a preferred vendor? And then potentially could some of our peer institutions be interested in joining in a program afterwards? So I think this is the right move forward.
Good. Would you like to make a motion?
Yep.
Before you do, I thought of something that is interesting. What you were saying, Mayor, about where we've come in, let's say, 10 years. And I was reminded that when I first came to the city, we were working with the planning department on issuing an RFP for a vendor for bike share program where we were going to pay them. And we were unsuccessful in getting that RFP out. And now look how it's changed. They're going to pay us to bring bikes here. So sometimes it works out.
That's right. Good.
Hopefully. So I'll move that City Council approves Resolution 22-18 as drafted.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Okay, takes us to new business. First is consideration and award of bid for 2022 State of Good Repair Street Resurfacing, Richmond Road. Mr. Small, welcome.
Again, we're back at our State of Good Repair paving project. Normally we do these in the fall, however, because of COVID and some other delays, or rather we do these in the spring. This one ended up falling into the fall in order to get it advertised and get the money spent on time to meet our federal programs. This State of Good Repair project is Richmond Road from just north of High Street all the way to New Hope Road, and then the section of bypass from Richmond Road up to the bridge. So they're all right in the same area. We were awarded $294,830 of SGR money from FY '22. And then we also had to receive an additional $300,000 in CTB formula funds due to the bids being what they were. So this was advertised in June. We received 2 bids from our local contractors. Lehigh Paving Corporation had the low bid at $567,085. And this work is projected to occur right after Labor Day. We wanted to wait till after kids are all back in school and college kids have returned to session, as well as many of the tourists have gone back to their homes. So we wanted to wait till the lower traffic times after Labor Day. So this work will also, because of the traffic volume along that section of road, we're planning on doing all of this work. Most of the paving work will be done at night, with some striping will probably happen during the day, as well as some of the adjacent sidewalk upgrades that are required. With that, I'll leave it to you, and if you have any questions.
Well, thank you for bringing this to us, and just in general, thank you for making sure that our streets are always in good repair. There may be 1 or 2 people who are comfortable with potholes. I'm not, and I think the rest of the city probably appreciates it. This intersection has, the right word is, not plagued me, but bothered me maybe for years. And I asked this question leading into striping. As you come in from that side of town heading into Williamsburg, there's 2 lanes that turn left onto Bypass Road and 1 single lane that comes into the city. I've always considered that as kind of taking our traffic and from the city and directing it into your counties so that those customers could spend money there. And so is there a way that we could have maybe that center lane be a forward lane and a left turn, rather than just having 2 lanes automatically turn left and only a single lane going forward?
It makes it problematic when you look at the signal timing of the thing. Right now, we've got it set up such that the straight lane coming into town is on what we call Phase 6. Phase 1 are the 2 left turn lanes, and then Phase 2 are the 2 lanes that go straight coming out of town, heading westbound. While Phase 6, the straight lane coming into town, can be green the entire time that Phase 1 is turning left, but also at the same time we're having green going straight, which cannot occur at the same time. So the straight lane coming into town actually has twice the green time as the left turns. So we actually have the same volumes coming into town as we do turning left. If we went ahead and tried to make that a straight and left turn lane, well, now we can't take advantage of the green straight coming out of town for greens going straight. And so you end up, it doesn't work as well.
Well, and I appreciate you explaining, and that makes perfect sense. And I think having the longer green coming in town also keeps traffic from bottling up behind it.
Exactly. And the other issue that's always plagued this intersection has always been there's been obstructions for going lane widening in that direction. We've got trees, we got the existing signal poles. There's been issues with the parking lot, and the adjacent landowner has never wanted to have that widening for loss of parking. And then the other thing has been the physical constraints, such as we used to have in the sidewalk on the south side a natural gas regulator station, which would have required cost to relocate that, and that's very expensive. So recently that was relocated by the gas company at their cost across the street, so that's no longer an impediment. So if council did feel that it was important to do a lane widening in this area, and my understanding the property owner is much more amenable to a widening, it might be one of those things that I suggest we put on a future project for the capital improvement plan at some point.
Good, I appreciate the
So
response.
something to think about in your discussions when you're going through the GIOs.
Thank you, Mr. Small. Mr. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Small, for the presentation, and most of all, thank you for the work you do to find these dollars to keep our roads in good repair, so that we're not paying the full price of keeping our roads in good repair. So appreciate all the work you do there.
Yeah, this one was especially challenging because we knew we had just under 300,000 going into the bid opening when we received the bids in late July. And then the bids came in nearly twice as much. So we had to do a quick scramble and made a few phone calls, and VDOT was able to come through with the additional funds. And it's all due to the rising oil prices that we've seen, as well as, because that affects the price of asphalt, fuel to haul it, as well as escalating prices for material supply for a lot of the stuff that goes into it. It's just supply chain issues are rampant across the board.
And if I recall, Lehigh's done work recently.
They actually are just finishing up the current contract for Jamestown Road and South Henry Street.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, and thanks for explaining the intersection there, bypass in Richmond Road, because I know one of your goals is to minimize the time anybody has to wait.
Exactly.
By having those two left-hand turn lanes, you can get that traffic going quickly and get that out of there, so you don't have to have them with a green as long as you would otherwise.
That's correct.
Also, I thank you for being responsive in the past. I remember saying that early in the morning, I'd have to wait while the walk sign went to don't walk when nobody was around, and you were able to fine-tune that. So that's the advantage of having these smart intersections.
Yeah, and part of our cost that we've included in this is just in case any of those traffic induction loops get damaged, we're ready to get those repaired before we even put the pavement down. So that way you won't even see the lines.
Oh, that's great. Now, so going back to, I think, the last project, Jamestown Road.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the planning commissioners was asking me why we stopped where we did on Jamestown Road going towards William and Mary. Can you talk about that? Because wasn't the William and Mary project?
Yes, we've actually been working with the college, or the university. William and Mary is in the process of getting the dam for Lake Matoka recertified. And in that part of that process of the review, they're going to require shifting the merge lane a little further up because they're going to need room for some of the improvements on the downstream side of the dam. Taking into account all of that work upcoming, we didn't want to waste the money on paving a road when we knew they were going to come in with heavy construction work fairly soon. I haven't got a timeline yet for that work. My understanding is it still has to go out for bid through that process, but I believe it's supposed to go from the fall, and then that way they can start work in the spring on that project.
Yeah, and following in terms of how we can help William and Mary, if Lehigh does have any extra asphalt, the big pothole on Ucrop Drive in front of the business school?
Ucrop Drive
Yeah, would be.
is not a city street.
No, I'm saying helping William and Mary, you know.
Well, that actually is a VDOT responsibility
VDOT
to maintain
on campus?
the roads on campus. Yes.
Ah, okay. Well, I'll make a call on that one then.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. And just to follow up on Mr. Maslin was talking about Jamestown Road, and I know that there were some questions and concerns initially about staging of the equipment when that project was done, and also access to neighborhoods. So can you explain a little bit about the process you perceive to take place for Richmond Road so that we can alleviate those concerns at the front?
The biggest way we're going to deal with it is, of course, doing the work at night. The milling work and the lane closures, those will all occur at night when almost every single place along there is a business owner. So they're only open during the day. We do have a few hotels that we will also work with them on making sure they can get their patrons in and out. Many of them have multiple entrances. And so normally when we're milling, doing the milling work, grinding off the top surface of the asphalt, that's a quick process. So we only have an entrance closed for a very short time. Asphalt is a little longer. It does take longer to roll it out and let it cool down enough so that it cures. But that's generally about a half hour to an hour.
So even for the restaurants on Richmond Road, you don't foresee them having an issue? Because they close early, I guess early enough and.
Early enough, and we'll start
Yeah.
late enough so that we're
Yeah.
trying not to impact them, minimize how much we do impact them.
And do you have an estimate for the overall time period for this repaving to take place?
This, given how many tons of asphalt we'll be putting down on this road, I would guess that most of the work will probably occur in, between mid-September and mid-October. But we may have some that'll go into later October. But we hope to finish everything before Thanksgiving.
Okay. And homecoming is the weekend of
I got it
October
on
the
my
8th.
schedule,
I'm
ma'am.
sure you have it on your schedule. And I just, again, wanted to say thank you for all of your work. I think you were a little modest in the pursuit of the extra VDOT funds, so really appreciate you going above.
Always
and
got to
beyond.
have a backup plan on some of
Right.
these bids.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
And I echo all that's been said, Aaron. No additional questions, except that, yeah, the 300,000 we had budgeted for this is a tad shy of what the low bid was, so.
A little bit.
Thank you for working your magic and getting VDOT to cough up the rest.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Small. Oh, I guess we need to
Make a motion.
take an action item on that. Is there a motion?
Yes, I'm wearing green for spending money, so I move that City Council accept the 300,000 in urban formula funds from VDOT and apply them to the project, as well as award the bid and authorize the city manager to execute the 2022 State of Good Repair Street Resurfacing Richmond Road contract with Lee Highway Paving Corporation for $567,085 based on unit prices.
Second.
Long one.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Takes us on to item B, consideration and approval of wayfinding plan and installation of Phase 1 of signage.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. At your Monday work session, we reviewed the draft wayfinding plan with you. The consultant came in to share that with you. And for the audience, a wayfinding plan is a way to make it easier for residents and visitors to find Williamsburg, find a place to park, and then know where to stroll and eat and enjoy events and shop. So the plan, as you heard Monday, involved quite a bit of stakeholder meetings as well as public input. So you've seen the plan, and today we're asking you to approve the plan, which is the design of the signs, and to authorize the city manager to implement Phase 1. So we've broken the program into 4 phases due to funding constraints. We have funding to do Phase 1 from a Tourism Development Fund grant. And we'll be working to find funds for the next phases as swiftly as possible. But Phase 1 will be the pedestrian signage, Phase 2 will be parking, and then the Phase 3 would be kiosks, hopefully e-paper kiosks, and then Phase 4 will be gateway signage. So what will happen if you approve this and authorize the city manager to proceed is we will finalize, you'll be approving the design, we will finalize the wording, and we will copy edit that, and you had some questions about the orientation map. All of that will be finalized and reviewed, and then it will go out to public procurement. Anticipated schedule would be it would come back to you in December for approval because it is over $100,000, so you would be approving the actual appropriation of the funds to pay for that project, and then production and installation would go into the spring. So that's what we're asking today.
Well, thank you. I personally am excited about this. I'm reminded gateway signs coming into Williamsburg and what a difference that made, just, in terms of serving the purpose that it had of direct, bringing people into town and helping them to get to where they needed to be and wanted to be. That same experience will happen on a micro level with these new signs in and around the downtown area. Look forward to getting to the next stage where we'll see, everything will be mapped out and the signs, be appropriate to where they are, and question, some of the fine tuning will be done. We did have a question from a member of the community, is there an opportunity in all this to take the efforts of the style of signs, the colors, and then maybe work with our regional partners at Colonial Williamsburg and College of William and Mary to create some uniformity in that. Is that probably something that could be available?
Absolutely. So William and Mary and Colonial Williamsburg are our biggest stakeholders in this issue. Their properties and their wayfinding systems intersect. So Colonial Williamsburg, we have discussed how it will coordinate with their signage. They have Merchant Square signage that association and those businesses pay for, but they will need less signage once our signage comes in, and then also to coordinate through the historic area as well. William and Mary does not have pedestrian signage in the same way, but they are certainly aware of our signage, getting people to their campus where they can then enjoy the assets there.
Well, that might be something we look into, because, as people walk from Duke of Gloucester Street over to the Wren Yard and Sunken Gardens, might be nice to have some signage there, bring folks the other way. So just something to consider.
Absolutely.
But thank you for all the work on this, and looking forward to finally getting this off the ground, or in the ground, so to speak. Yeah. Mr. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Witt. I agree, this is, I think this is going to be a huge improvement for downtown, and we've talked about it long enough. It's exciting to see that we're moving forward and get some signs in the ground. I was wondering, could you just briefly talk about the public's involvement in the process for those that weren't watching on Monday?
Absolutely. So this program started, the design started pre-COVID. It's hard to believe, but it was January of 2020. The $250,000 grant from the Tourism Development Fund was awarded. And so we were gearing up to do our public procurement and start, and COVID hit. So that delayed us about 9 months to get our consultant on board. Merge was brought on board. And then we spent the next 9 months doing stakeholder meetings, very targeted with Colonial Williamsburg, William and Mary, the bus system, also all of your boards and commissions. So the ARB, the Planning Commission, and businesses and residents throughout the area. And then we also did a public, it was on Zoom, but we did a public meeting where we went over, we had several attendees, went over the entire process, and then did a survey that all citizens could take, an online survey identifying 3 different design proposals, and it was unanimous. The second design proposal was selected, and then we held yet another public input meeting saying this is where we are, here's the design. That was also done on Zoom with, I think they had 152 people respond with 450 different comments. So it was quite extensive public participation.
Thank you. And I think it's important for everyone to know that there was that opportunity for public participation, and that there was an overwhelming selection by everyone involved. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Just following up in terms of some of the comments on Monday, I think it's really important to get Colonial Williamsburg to actually look at substance on that site plan so that we're actually showing what's important to them in terms of their educational mission.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Will do.
So again, thank you for the presentation, and to Vice Mayor Dent's comments about the public participation. It's good to know that the number of people participating increased. I was on that first Zoom call, I think in whenever it was, early 2020, and I think there were maybe 7 of us. So it's good that we got a lot more input from that. And for me, it's really exciting, having been an advocate for the Tourism Development Fund, to see yet another project from that fund come to fruition. So I did have one question. You were talking about December, as far as, I believe that's when you were hoping the RFP would be back.
Correct. We hope the public procurement process will be finished and we'll be able to bring a recommendation to you to authorize the funding.
And so when will the finalization of the design, the verbiage, and all of that be done and reviewed?
Sure. Let me double check before I speak.
Yeah, I'm just going to reiterate while she's looking it up. This is exactly the same situation as the, what were we just talking about? the e-bike pilot program. All you're doing today is authorizing us to issue an RFP to find an installer, and then we'll get proposals back with costs that'll have to come back to you. We anticipate it to be over $100,000, which means I can't just approve that. So you're going to see it again before any real action occurs, and have the opportunity to fine-tune anything with that particular vendor that maybe we have suggested or worked through as we look at their proposals.
Okay, just wanted to sort of
The
get the dates.
documentation will be completed September, so
Oh,
we'll start that right away and have something finished mid-September.
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. I have no further questions to add. I know we'll be seeing this again in December, it sounds like, so both council and the public will have another opportunity to comment. There had been some points raised on Monday about the layout of the mapping and what branding universities or colleges might use in the area, so obviously that will be settled. It's fully in support today just for issuing the RFP.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So,
Like, yeah, make a motion.
more money. So I move that city council approve the wayfinding plan and authorize the city manager to implement Phase 1 within the budget of the $250,000 TDF grant.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Great, well, thank you very much, and let's look forward to having that completed. Next is item C, consideration and approval of ordinance number 22-06, an ordinance to establish reasonable time, place, and manner regulations on street performances in Merchant Square and in the historic area. Shelton.
So since Monday, we've had some comments that I just wanted to talk about with council and identify the places where I've made alterations in your alternate version in your agenda. First, I need to clarify, these are time, place, and manner restrictions, right? So the where and the when and the how loud, these are not content-based restrictions because they cannot legally be that. And so one of the questions that we had was whether or not someone would be prohibited from asking for tips or putting out a tip jar, or to extend that, putting out a sign that says tips accepted, if you like the music, please contribute, putting their case down on the street, which is sort of the typical thing that you would see. Nothing in this does that. But I have clarified that instruments and cases can be put on the right-of-way. Tip jars can be put on the right-of-way, signs can be put on the right-of-way, because we're not allowed to regulate that portion of it. There's also some questions about the location. So I sent to the individual who inquired about that, I sent a map, and he further inquired about Prince George Street. So this ordinance only encompasses those 3 spots that you're approving if you approve this ordinance. But there's nothing that prohibits other performance areas from being designated in Merchant Square. There's a little bit of concern about Prince George Street just because the sidewalk is narrow. But certainly we could consider those and add them at a later date. I have added some language which is consistent with the rest of the city code regarding not being able to sell merchandise on the street. So asking to contribute or for donation or tip is one thing, but we don't allow sales of goods on the city streets in the city code anyway. And so that's consistent with the way that the rest of the code is interpreted and exists. Otherwise, it is the same ordinance that you saw on Monday with those changes. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
I would just say too that the mayor and I attended Merchant Square Association meeting this week, and this was a topic of concern. They're one of the entities that brought it up and asked us to look at ways to regulate it. In downtown, we're seeing more and more pressure for this type of performance art, and I think there's an aptitude for it if it's regulated properly, and that's the step that we're trying to take today. A couple of things that we were asked, and it gets right in line with the comments from the city attorney, were can we regulate signage, because you put out your tip jar and then you put out a sign, please tip, or what have you, and the answer is no. But there is a limitation on that. Sometimes people put out signs saying, if you put money in the hat, then that money is going to go to a cause or a purpose. And in those situations where people feel like that's not really honest, we do investigate for fraud. So there are some limitations as to what you can do with your signage.
Also, the question came up about how is someone supposed to know when a special events permit has been issued. And right now, that requires a phone call to the city manager's office, but I'm sure that the IT department could figure out a way to put a calendar on the city's website that would make that a lot easier. And so that is a suggestion that someone had, and I think it's a good one.
To that, Vice Mayor and I were talking about that today. Special event permits generally come for occasion for the arts, art on the square, those types of things, which are on social media and different networks for on different calendars of events. And so staying abreast of those things, rarely I think is your special event that encompasses the whole area. There's ways to find, but I think, if we could have those added to the city calendar, I think would be helpful. Need something else to do, right?
And,
Yes, sir.
And just to reiterate, this is not in any way an attempt to prohibit performances on the street. It's just intended to regulate it enough that everybody can use the street in comfort and together and in cooperation with each other.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that point up, because I think, all of us would agree that the vibrancies that's created with real music downtown is enjoyable, and our visitors, whether they're residents or from out of town, enjoy that for the most part. It may not always be their style of music, but it adds to the ambiance, and so we certainly don't want to diminish that from happening. We just want to make sure that it's not too loud and not in competition with one another, and it's appropriate for the area. I did have a question which came to mind. What is the definition of Merchant Square?
All right, so as it's defined in this ordinance, it's bounded by Prince George Street, Henry Street, Francis Street, and Boundary Street. So it would be the sidewalk on Prince George that's closest to Merchant Square, the sidewalk on Francis that's closest to Merchant Square, and then Henry and Boundary.
So, and thank you for that. So if somebody wanted to stand on Prince George Street on the other side,
It would not be regulated by this ordinance. The noise would still have to stay below 65 decibels measured at 15 feet or at 65 decibels measured at 15 feet. You can't block the sidewalk. That's in another provision of the city code. But this does not prevent street performances anywhere else, and it doesn't, other than those two things, place and loudness, it doesn't regulate it anywhere else in the city. This is where we're seeing the problem with the competition and people too close to each other and the excessively loud volume. And so that's why we focused on this in the ordinance.
well, so, thank you for putting the ordinance together. I think it's been done in a way that it doesn't stymie what it is I think we all like to have downtown, and provides an opportunity for it to continue just in a manner that's more inviting to our visitors, and I think that's our goal. Do you have any questions? Or?
Yeah, thank you for clarification on Prince George, because that's a question I had when the questions were asked from a concerned member of the public. The other question that it just came to mind was, if we're talking about that defined area now, but if Prince George Street were to become an issue in the future, again, we're not trying to stymie those performances, but if that became an issue in the future, is that something we could add to?
We'd have to look at that. I mean, the issue is, and I think it's an important point to make, is while we're not regulating this type of performance art anywhere else in the city, you still can't block the sidewalks, right? And most areas of the city, the sidewalks are so narrow, you can't have both pedestrians and a performer. And so I don't know, because those streets aren't closed, it's much harder to dedicate a busking station. So if that became something that we wanted to pursue, we'd have to take a look at how best to accomplish it. But yes, we can expand this particular ordinance anytime.
Well, and I guess I was thinking worst case scenario, if individuals want to perform on the Merchant Square area and the space not available, and it starts transitioning over to Prince George and there's multiple performers, are we going to hear complaints in the future from individuals on that side of the street that could request something similar?
Well, in theory, yes. I mean, the easy part about Merchant Square is twofold. One, we know what the problem is in Merchant Square, and it does seem to be concentrated there. But you have to have a space to be able to do it, and that's the challenge with Prince George Street. If people have to walk into the roadway, because there's not enough space to pass on the sidewalk. That's a big safety concern.
So if a performer did that and it was blocking the sidewalk, we would ask them to move.
Right. Thank you.
A question for the city clerk. Do we have any speaker cards on this topic?
We do.
So one of the concerns I have is our format for our business meetings has the public forum after we've taken actions. So any thoughts on that, Mayor?
Yes, so that's why we have a work session on Monday, which has 2 open forums for people to speak.
But some people are reacting to what they've heard in the work session on Monday, the presentation. They may come to this meeting with public comment.
Anything else for?
Thank you, Ms. Shelton, particularly for the clarification on Prince George Street. I don't want to get into the weeds too much, but right beside, I guess, Kilwins is the entry to the parking garage there, and so that's a wider area. So what would be the position there? Because I assume that's city property.
There's a city alleyway there that connects to the parking garage. It's something that city staff has talked a lot about beautifying, and that's something I hope that we get to as part maybe of our GIO discussion that's coming up as well. But again, I would be concerned about traffic there, but that's something that we would look at. I say when we get to the point that that's a concern, we will figure out a solution.
Okay, when we get to that bridge, we'll cross it.
That's
yeah.
right.
So then the other thing, again, not to get too much into the weeds, when we talk about signs, are there limits? I assume there's limits on size for,
This ordinance does not limit that.
okay,
We were very careful about not stepping on anything related to content, because there is a specific problem that we're trying to resolve, which is the conflict of multiple performers loudly performing in the same places at the same time. And so that's the problem that we're aiming for. When we start getting into regulating the size of the sign, that gets a little more challenging. If we start regulating how many, that gets more challenging, and we certainly can't dictate what it says beyond the example for fraud-related reasons associated with solicitations that are not in fact real. So this was intentionally not touching that issue.
so another bridge we might cross in the future, or not.
Yeah, I mean, that is a concern. It's clearly a concern at the Merchant Square Association meeting. It's just a tricky subject to try and regulate signage generally, and signage of this type doubly so. Yeah, I think you're right. I think if we see what happens, and if that becomes a problem, we'll see if there's a way to address it creatively.
Thank you.
I had no additional questions after it was established from a member of the public who had the curiosity around, as a busker themselves, could the tip jar still be there? And then locationally, where would the medallions be? And almost sort of similar to our RFP with the e-bikes, this is a pilot project where we would be able to decide on the best location for those medallions. That being said, I do agree with Councilman Maslin, though, in that I think it'd be beneficial for sometimes the public comment to move to the beginning of a meeting, should there be people to speak on that, and I was hopeful to hear any relevant comments on this issue before an action is taken.
So once we conclude this, I'm going to ask the city attorney to kind of help us, or city manager, remind us how the agendas are set. Conversation. But I hear both of you, and we do have a speaker's card. Mr. Gussman, would you like to come forward?
Well, he's coming up. I'll just address the location question. We did work with Merchant Square Association and asked them to inform us about where they thought the best locations were for the busking stations. And so the plan here is, because as you said, it's a pilot program, our initial step is the sticker. And so when we print those stickers in a few weeks or so, I don't want anybody to think that they're going to go out there tomorrow and this is all going to be set up. In a few weeks or so, we'll have these stickers printed, and we'll meet with Merchant Square again and make sure we're happy with the placement. We put the sticker down, let this play out for a little while. If that's the location that works, then we'll move to the bronze seated in the pavement.
Welcome,
Good
sir.
afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. I'm a street musician. I've been playing French music on the accordion for ever since you put out those lovely tables and benches out on Duke of Gloucester Street, I've had a lot of fun doing it, and I think a lot of people have enjoyed my music. I have had countless little girls dancing with their fathers in front of my music. I think the ordinance is very well thought out, and I think there's a need for it. When I first started playing, there was very few people doing it, and as the number of street musicians has increased, and in the beginning, we were able to, amongst ourselves, the musicians, sort of divvy things up and agree, oh, if you want to play Saturday morning, I won't interfere with you. I'll come. What time do you think you'll stop playing? I'll take over then. And it was very informal, but there's more people now, and I understand the need for the regulations. The 65 decibels is great. If you wanted to ban amplification altogether, I support that, but I have a pretty good idea of what 65 decibels sounds like, and I don't think there'd be interference if people kept the music down. Of course, I would consider maybe asking you to put a total ban on trombones, but if I did that, if I asked you for that, you never know. Some misguided soul may come in and ask for a ban on accordions. So, thank you for addressing my questions about the tip jar. One concern about the medallions. The draft ordinance I looked at specified 3. I would ask you to maybe leave it general. Do you need to specify in the ordinance 3? Maybe after 6 months, and we see how we all see how this works out. Maybe there might be room for another medallion in some place without having to amend the ordinance. Leave it up to the city manager's discretion, and let him set the number of medallions, so it can modify. And maybe it is possible. Maybe it might turn out that 3 is too many. I don't think it will. I have a pretty good idea what it would sound like. One sort of small issue from the musician's standpoint is the ordinance was really specific about what you could have, and there's a little bit of a problem. I play most of the year out there, except in the really cold months, and in the summer, everybody's sort of seeking shade. You really can't just stay out in the sun and play in the open sun, regardless of your instrument. With the sun beating down on you, you need some kind of shade, and most of us have retreated to under the umbrellas or a shady spot. Is there any way the ordinance could address that? If you have, with that prescribed 10 square foot area, or the prescribed area, how is there any way we can get shade? And this would only affect, the musicians for, summer. That's my only other concern. But I wholeheartedly support the ordinance, and I haven't had a chance to talk to, all the other musicians that I know, but I think they recognize there's a problem too with competing. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming forward. Is there anybody else would like to come forward and talk about this ordinance? Okay. Seeing none, is there anything additional from council?
Mr. Trivett, could you talk a little bit more about why and how the 3?
Yeah. What we said, we're not experts on Merchant Square's dynamics day in, day out, and we don't own the businesses adjacent, and so we wanted to go to those stakeholders to get their input before we designed a solution to a problem. And it was their idea to limit it to 3. I didn't give them a number. I said, we can put out these medallions. I'd like you to tell us how many and where you think is appropriate. We talked about how far the area should be and that kind of thing. And it did take them probably 2 months to arrive at the conclusion they did in terms of 3 at these 3 spots. And so I think they did put a great deal of thought into it. My recommendation was, let's start with 3, and if we think there's demand and a space for yet another, then we can add that.
Okay, thank you.
And just to follow up to Mr. Gussman's point about the sun, the 3 locations can be moved around accordingly.
Initially, yes. I mean, I think what Chris has done is she's established that the medallion is the anchor point, and then you have a 10-foot box, an imaginary 10-foot box around that anchor point. I don't envision us finding a way to install umbrellas or something like that permanently in the busking stations, so.
So I think, just make the point that we're all aware that, it is hotness on, in the summertime, and so this is a pilot program, so we're gonna see how it works out, and hopefully it works out for the betterment of everybody, so. Motion?
Yes, I move that City Council adopt ordinance 22-06.
Could you specify it's the alternate version?
I move that City Council adopt the alternate version of ordinance 22-06.
Thank you.
Second?
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Okay, so that takes us to the real open forum, which is, again, is an opportunity for anybody to come forward to address council on any matter. Seeing none, I'll close the open forum, and then just maybe one of the two of you can kind of talk about how we develop the agenda scheduling.
Paper, rock, scissors?
So council has discussed this issue from time to time and eventually fixed on 2 open forums during the work session and the 1 open forum during the council meeting. And that's the way that it's been for a long time. There is no legal reason why it has to be that way. That's what council has in the past found to be appropriate. There are some times when someone becomes aware of an ordinance after the work session, and from time to time, council has accommodated that. But you are required to have an open forum once every 3 months. The open forum is up to council.
The only thing that I would add to that is the premise behind what we do is that the Thursday meeting of City Council is your business meeting. It's a meeting for this council to do the business of the city. The idea being that we've already collected necessary input that we need to make the decisions.
And so, for me, taking both of those statements in consideration, we do provide open forums and opportunities for people who are interested on any items to come forward during the work session. As we evolve into the Thursday's meeting to do our work, sometimes the agendas are heavy and weighted. And offering, again, that opportunity for each of the different items that comes up becomes very cumbersome and time-consuming and sometimes confusing during the meetings. There have been, and so I don't know that I would agree to add an open forum to the work, to this meeting at the beginning of the meeting, but I think on the fly, so to speak, having an allowance such as we did today to have somebody provide some input is okay, but I think that should be the discretion of the mayor and the council.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that's good, and the clerk can sort of let us know, especially the mayor, know in advance, which items the public has come to. I think we sort of want to err on the side of letting the public voice their opinions more than less, especially since we really haven't been getting that many from the public actually coming to meetings anymore. So it's important that if we've got 1 or 2 people coming, that we hear them before the action. The other thing that, we can talk about is when we have formal public hearings, legally, we actually have those comments before the action, so the precedent is there on a legal public hearing.
Well, and the public hearing has different rules. You can't come to council and speak on whatever topic you want. During a public hearing, the subject matter is limited to the subject of the public hearing.
Right. So that's good that if it's a public hearing, especially on land use issues, that we have that ability to hear from the public before we take an action.
And I think we could discuss this amongst ourselves about how we want to proceed, but not to be in opposition, but I'm kind of on the other side of the coin. If we come in on Thursday and we have 1 open forum at the end, it's confusing to the public if we're going to allow people to speak on certain issues before we vote on them, whereas they may not have come to the meeting not realizing they could speak at it prior to us taking any action on the item, So if we were gonna move in that direction, I would rather it be all open forum and have an opportunity to speak on any item, but not allowing particular items as we move through the agenda, because someone may not have attended the meeting thinking they don't have the opportunity to speak to it.
So in that regard, would you suggest moving the open forum to the beginning, earlier up in the agenda?
I'd be in favor of that.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, I've found that I agree, I understand the idea around having the work session be for public comment. I've found in practicality, it doesn't so much always mean that the public sees it that way, and it very well may be coverage of something we did Monday that brings people on Thursday. So it feels like at least probably 3 times that I could count in my tenure of 2 years, we've had to move up the open forum on Thursday because people have come and they want to speak before we take the action, and they're just there for that action. So I agree with the fact that, if we were to open it up before every single item that we're addressing on a Thursday, the meeting could become quite cumbersome. But I'd be in favor, and maybe we can discuss it together in the midst of, before the next meeting, moving the open forum to be the beginning of Thursday, which normally would probably be unattended unless someone has something to say.
Well, and I would point out, if you don't mind, that if anyone has a question regarding something on the work session, we all have emails that are available, and in this instance, Mr. Gussman emailed council, he also emailed me, and I answered all of the questions that he sent me via email before this meeting. So we do the best we can as a staff to respond to those things.
Okay, so let's give it some thought, and we'll give some feedback to the city manager and see what kind of changes can be made. Okay, we are now at the end of our agenda.
So I believe this calls for a move to adjourn.
Correct.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.